The mahogany conference table gleamed beneath the fluorescent lights as if the whole room had been staged for theater. Executives from Helix Dynamics lined one side, their expressions carefully neutral. Across from them sat the acquisition team from Cumbre Global, calm, practiced, their portfolios aligned like chess pieces. I took my usual seat at the far end, a place chosen not for prestige but for vantage. From there, I could see everything without being seen. Julian Ortega strutted into the room late, his charcoal suit too sharp, his grin too wide. He tapped the table with the arrogance of someone convinced the world had been built for him to manage. Then he delivered the blow. "I'm the vice president of operations now. Claudia will be transitioning out. 5 business days should be more than enough," he declared, his voice ringing with false authority. The words landed like a slap. Around the table, a ripple of murmurs spread, some muffled laughter breaking the surface. He didn't even look at me. He stared at the buyers as if expecting applause. For a moment, the room blurred. 10 years of my life, dismissed with a sentence. 10 years of late nights, systems built from scratch, vendor contracts negotiated over cold coffee, all reduced to just operations. I steadied myself, my face an impassive mask. I would not give him the spectacle he craved. It was then I noticed Rodrigo Villalba, the CEO of Cumbre Global. He hadn't laughed. He hadn't moved. His leather binder lay in front of him, pristine except for a single blue tab protruding from the side page 14. He caught my gaze and, almost imperceptibly, nodded. The laughter in the room faded to static in my ears. Julian kept talking, parading slides full of buzzwords, convinced he was scripting his coronation. But that nod, that small, deliberate acknowledgement, told me another story. One Julian hadn't read, one he would never see coming. I sat back in my chair, silent, absorbing every detail, humiliated but unshaken. I knew this wasn't the end. This was the opening move, and the real game had just begun. The cracks in the glass tower were already forming, and soon, they would split wide open. When Julian's words echoed through the conference room, I thought back to nights when Helix Dynamics wasn't yet worth anyone's attention. I remembered rocking my daughter to sleep with one arm while typing vendor contracts with the other, praying the Wi-Fi wouldn't crash before midnight. Back then, survival was my fuel. Payroll had to be met, invoices paid, systems stabilized. No one was applauding me in designer suits. They didn't even notice me, except when something broke and I was the only one who knew how to fix it. I built the compliance framework line by line, cross-referencing federal regulations until dawn blurred into daylight. I drafted the emergency response manual during weekends when the office was dark, and I alone kept the lights on literally. The operational continuity that made Helix attractive to Cumbre Global wasn't a miracle. It was my sweat woven into every document, every protocol, every contract. Julian, meanwhile, arrived with a resume padded by tuition and entitlement. His MBA framed in mahogany hung outside his office door like a shield. He spoke of paradigm shifts and innovation ecosystems, words strung together like beads on a necklace that sparkled but snapped under any real weight. The junior staff cheered him on in public, dazzled by his confidence. But when real problems hit, they slipped quietly into my office with lowered voices, asking for solutions he could never provide. At first, I resented it. The constant reliance, the invisible burden, the knowledge that my name would never appear in glossy reports, though my work carried them all. But slowly, bitterness hardened into something sharper. Focus. If they wanted to erase me, I would let them try. I would let them believe I was invisible while I fortified the very systems that kept the company standing. So when Julian laughed and stripped me of my title, I didn't crumble. I thought of the warehouses still running because of my planning, the contract still binding because of my oversight, the entire acquisition propped up by scaffolding only I understood. And I realized being underestimated wasn't my weakness. It was my edge. Could years of being overlooked become the sharpest weapon I'd ever wield? It didn't take long for Julian's crown to slip. Within his first month, he canceled 3 vendor meetings because he thought supplier relations were old school. He replaced them with glossy presentations about rebranding Helix Dynamics into something sexy. When questioned, he waved a manicured hand and promised the buyers would be dazzled by the new logos and color schemes. Then he brought in Esteban Rivas, his former college roommate, as Director of Strategic Innovation. Esteban arrived with a standing desk, a ring light, and a whiteboard covered in buzzwords: scalable, disruptive, synergy, not a single measurable target. While they laughed in glass-walled offices, invoices went unpaid and systems jammed with neglected approvals. The break came one Tuesday morning when a supplier stormed into headquarters, waving a contract and threatening litigation if their payments weren't processed by end of day. Julian was nowhere to be found. Esteban was sketching futuristic flowcharts about integrated disruption. So I stepped in. I spent the entire night with finance, cross-checking ledgers and pulling archived receipts until the supplier finally agreed to withdraw legal action. By dawn, the crisis had been buried under a tidy email chain and a signed extension. To everyone else, it was as if the problem never existed. But not everyone was fooled. Camila Ibanez from Cumbre Global sat in the corner during the negotiation, silent but watchful, scribbling notes into her leather-bound portfolio. When the supplier finally left, her eyes met mine for just a moment. No smile, no thanks, just acknowledgement. Later that evening, as I closed my laptop, an email arrived. From Leandro Munoz, the strategist on Cumbre's team. 6 words. Nothing more. Your silence speaks louder than their noise. For the first time since Julian declared my irrelevance, I felt a shift. Maybe I wasn't invisible after all. Maybe the buyers already knew who was holding Helix together. When the empire starts cracking, who do outsiders really trust, the loudest voice or the quietest hand? The email came late in the evening, buried between budget requests and a reminder about Julian's visionary town hall. At first, I assumed it was another boilerplate draft from legal, something meant to lull readers into skipping details. But when I opened the attachment transition staffing agreement, draft review, only my pulse quickened. Most of it was predictable titles, dotted line reporting, lists of signatures waiting to be filled. Yet halfway through, on page 16, I found it. A role no one had mentioned in any meeting. Not even in passing. Continuity Director. Its description was brief, but devastatingly clear. All operational decisions during the transition period require approval from the designated Continuity Director. Authority supersedes interim executives not ratified by the board. The line was empty. No name, no placeholder, a vacant seat, hidden in plain sight. I sat back in my chair, staring at the words. It wasn't a mistake. It was a deliberate gap, left like a trapdoor waiting for someone to notice. Quietly. I saved the document into a private folder I labeled Insurance. If the floor ever gave way beneath me, this clause could become the ground I stood on. The very next day, Julian paraded through the office declaring victory over bureaucracy. He bragged about streamlining approvals by eliminating half the compliance checks. I listened as he dismissed warnings from the legal team, his voice dripping with false confidence. We don't need 5 signatures for one contract, he said. We're innovators, not paper pushers. By afternoon, we were inches away from a regulatory breach that could have frozen millions in vendor contracts. I could have stopped it with a single email. Instead, I watched, documented, and archived every thread. Dates, times, his directives all neatly logged. For the first time in years, restraint felt more powerful than action. Let him believe he was untouchable. I was patient. I had my insurance. What if the empty seat in the contract was already waiting for me? The office printer whirred in the stillness of my apartment, the sound too loud for the hour. I slid the sheets of matte black stock through one by one, each feeding into the tray with the weight of intention. The design was simple, almost austere white lettering, clean font, no ornament. Claudia Serrano, Interim COO, Transition Operations, Cumbre Global. Not a title anyone had given me, not yet, but one the contract's silence had already promised. I stacked the cards carefully, tucking them into a slim case. I didn't plan to hand them out at networking events or slide them across cocktail napkins. They weren't for display. They were for me, proof that the authority waiting on page 16 wasn't a dream, but something I could hold between my fingers. The weight of the case in my pocket steadied me like an anchor. Sitting at my kitchen table, I thought back to 2 years earlier, when chaos struck Helix Dynamics after a sudden leadership exit. For 6 months, I'd carried the company as acting COO. Operations ran like clockwork. Vendors praised our reliability. Staff morale rose. But then the board filled the seat permanently with someone's cousin who had the right pedigree, the right surname. Nepotism had swept me aside without even a thank you. That memory used to burn like acid. Tonight, it hardened into steel. I understood now they had taught me the most valuable lesson. That merit alone would never be enough in their eyes. Power required more than competence. It required leverage. And this time, I had it. I slipped one card from the stack and traced my name in the pale glow of the desk lamp. My lips barely moved as I whispered to the empty room. Next time they underestimate me, I'll be ready. The printer light blinked off, leaving only silence. In my pocket rested the smallest of weapons, waiting for its moment. Could a single card, carried silently, topple an entire dynasty? The announcement came in a company-wide email dripping with exclamation marks. Transformation. Tuesday. Our compliance platform has migrated to a cutting-edge SaaS solution. Julian strutted through the office that morning as if he had just discovered electricity. He waved off questions from legal, shrugged at finance, and promised the new system would make us faster, leaner, unstoppable. By noon, invoices froze in the queue. Vendor payments stalled without routing information. Procurement reported suppliers locked out of their dashboards. Contracts stranded mid-renewal. One vendor's legal team threatened termination by close of business if the chaos wasn't resolved. Departments scrambled, panicked voices filling every corridor. I sat in the crisis management room with my laptop, watching the screens flicker with error messages. The compliance staff looked ready to collapse. Rodrigo Villalba joined by video conference from Cumbre's headquarters, his expression unreadable, but his voice like a blade. Who authorized this migration? Without hesitation, Julian pointed across the table at me. Claudia insisted on clinging to outdated processes. I was forced to take decisive action. She resisted innovation at every turn. Eyes turned to me. I didn't defend myself with speeches. Instead, I reached into my briefcase and laid a folder on the table. Inside were printed emails with date stamps, meeting invitations Julian had declined, Slack threads where he'd typed "rip the Band-Aid off" in response to compliance concerns. Attached were access logs showing his credentials initiating the migration. Screenshots captured his directive. No need to overthink, just execute. I slid the folder toward Camila Ibanez. She opened it, scanned the first page, and passed it wordlessly to Rodrigo. He didn't look up. Leandro leaned back, arms crossed, watching Julian squirm. The room quieted, except for the hum of the servers straining under the failed system. I closed my laptop, folded my hands, and said nothing. The evidence spoke louder than any defense I could give. When lies collapse under proof, who gets buried in the rubble first? The mahogany table gleamed under the morning lights. Polished for a performance, Julian thought he was headlining. He stood at the head, pacing as if the acquisition was a talent show and he was the star contestant. His voice rang with rehearsed bravado. "We are thrilled to announce this new chapter for Helix Dynamics," he said, pausing for effect. "And as part of our streamlined leadership model, Claudia Serrano will be transitioning out within 5 business days, a graceful exit for her years of service." Esteban clapped. the sound hollow against the stillness of the buyers seated across the table. I felt every eye glance at me, waiting for a protest, a reaction, anything. I gave them none. Instead, I reached into my briefcase and withdrew a single card, mate black, clean font. Nothing more than my name and title, Claudia Serrano, Interim COO, Transition Operations, Cumbre Global. Without ceremony, I slid it across the table to Rodrigo Villalba. He picked it up, glanced down, and then laughed. Not mockery delight. The sound was sharp, sudden, filling the silence Julian thought he controlled. Rodrigo turned the card toward Camila Ibanez, seated at his right. She opened her binder with deliberate calm, flipping directly to the blue tab. Her voice was steady as she read aloud. Continuity Director Claudia Serrano, all transition authority final. The words landed heavier than any gavel. Julian froze, his practiced smile faltering. "That can't be," he stammered, but Rodrigo was already sliding the contract across the table, finger resting on the signature line. "There it is," he said quietly. "Your name, Julian, right beneath the clause that gives her authority." I didn't gloat, didn't smirk. I simply met Julian's eyes as the truth settled over him. The empire he thought he was inheriting had collapsed in a whisper, undone not by confrontation but by the contract he signed without reading. "How do you fight when the contract you signed handed me your crown?" Rodrigo didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He leaned back in his chair, the contract still open before him, and said with unshakable calm, "Julian, effective immediately. You are reassigned to our Denver facility, third shift. Warehouse operations? They could use your enthusiasm for efficiency." The silence that followed was suffocating. Julian's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. Esteban shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his earlier applause now an embarrassment echoing in his ears. I watched him lower his eyes, hands already moving under the table, no doubt refreshing his LinkedIn profile. HR's director stood and crossed the room to me. Without fanfare, she placed a small leather folder in front of me. Inside was a badge, the lettering crisp and unmistakable, Claudia Serrano, Interim Chief Operating Officer, Transition Operations, Cumbre Global. I picked it up, clipped it to my blazer, and pressed it until it clicked into place. That single sound, quiet, metallic, rang louder in my mind than all of Julian's speeches combined. Around the table, people shifted. Their posture changed, their eyes recalibrated. Authority had moved, and they all felt it. I didn't look back at Julian. I didn't need to. The weight of the badge on my chest was enough. The truth had been written into the contract, but now it was visible, undeniable. I wasn't dismissed. I had been positioned. I gathered my papers, slid the empty card case back into my bag, and stood. Rodrigo gave me a short nod, the kind only leaders give to other leaders. Camila closed her binder. Satisfied. The meeting was over, not with fireworks, but with a quiet transfer of power. Walking out of that boardroom, I carried no bitterness, only clarity. They had tried to bury me, but in doing so, they handed me the shovel. What happens when the one you buried walks away holding the shovel? Weeks later, I walked the concrete floor of the Denver warehouse, clipboard in hand, the air heavy with the scent of motor oil and cold steel. The hum of forklifts and the steady rhythm of pallets moving told me everything I needed to know. Efficiency had soared. The frameworks I'd introduced weeks earlier had already transformed the graveyard shift into a model of precision. Supervisors greeted me with firm handshakes, their eyes lit with relief. For the first time in years, their schedules made sense, their systems aligned, their people respected. It was a different kind of success, quieter than boardrooms and contracts, but no less real. I rounded a corner and froze. There, at a plastic table under flickering fluorescent lights, sat Julian. His suit was gone, replaced by a company-issued uniform 2 sizes too big. He was hunched over a sandwich wrapped in crumpled foil, the picture of defeat. When he noticed me, His face flushed. He straightened, searching for a trace of arrogance he no longer possessed. "Congratulations," he muttered, his voice low, roughened by nights of warehouse air. I studied him for a moment, then leaned closer. "The next time someone says they're just operations, listen carefully," I said. "Operations makes everything possible." The words landed like a stone dropped into still water. He flinched, but something shifted behind his eyes. For the first time, there was no smirk, no deflection, only recognition, and maybe the faintest glimmer of humility. I didn't wait for him to reply. I left him there, alone with his sandwich in the buzzing light above, the silence around him heavier than any reprimand. For Julian, it wasn't my words alone that stung, it was the realization that the empire he thought he owned had been built on the very foundation he dismissed. As I stepped back onto the warehouse floor, the hum of efficiency wrapped around me like a promise. Was this mercy, or the sharpest humiliation of all 6 months later? The Helix Cumbrae integration was complete. Every milestone met ahead of schedule. Analysts called it one of the smoothest corporate transitions in recent memory. When the Harvard Business Review issue arrived in my mailbox, I paused at the cover. My photo sat there, captured in the boardroom where it had all begun. The headline read, "Operational Excellence, the Hidden Engine Behind Historic Mergers." I didn't frame it as a trophy. I placed it on my shelf as a reminder that truth, sustained and methodical, had its own way of rising above noise. Competence had always been the story. Now, the world simply had no choice but to notice. One morning, arriving early to my office, I found a package waiting on my desk. No note, just brown wrapping paper and the careful scrawl of warehouse handwriting. Inside was a ceramic mug. Across its surface, in bold letters, it read, "World's Most Adequate Leader." The irony struck immediately Julian's old mug, once a joke about mediocrity, now reimagined by the Denver third shift crew. Taped to the handle was a sticky note. "We figured you deserved the upgrade too." I laughed out loud, not bitterly, but freely. That sound surprised even me. For months, I had carried the weight of battles, documentation, and silent strategy. Now, all that was left was the simple joy of knowing I had built something that lasted. Julian had faded into the background, his arrogance replaced by absence. But I no longer thought of him as the measure of my success. My revenge hadn't been destroying him, it had been proving, beyond doubt, that I was essential, that systems I designed, truths I defended, and results I delivered mattered more than titles or nepotism ever could. As I set the mug on my desk, sunlight poured across it, catching the letters. "Revenge is sweet, but respect the kind you build system by system, truth by truth that lasts forever. Isn't the most satisfying justice not crushing your enemy, but rising so high they can never reach you again?"